So I we've been working on this series for a long time. So I'm very, very excited to have you all here this afternoon to help us kick this series off. So this series is titled Creating Inclusive Spaces, Supporting LGBTQ plus individuals in the arts education community and classroom. This is session 1 of 3. This session specifically is titled Supporting LGBTQ plus young learners, Tools and Strategies. We're so excited to have you all here. My name is Kinsey Keck. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with like shoulder length brown hair. It's parted down the middle, and I'm wearing some large round wire framed glasses and a warm navy blue sweater with white and red stripes going across, and my background is blurred. I'm also the programs director here at the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. Hopefully you're familiar with us, but if you're not, the Roundtable is a grassroots service organization that works to improve and advance the state of arts education. We do that through professional development workshops, advocacy, and online resources and platforms to connect the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting online via Zoom, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we work and live on unceded lands. Mannahatta, or the place also known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We would like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and Brown and immigrant communities which have helped build this city that we know and love. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, we would like to, again, uplift a number of contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we feel that we can all support and learn from. So I'm just dropping those in the chat once more. If you haven't before, please save those links, check out these organizations, support them with donations if you can. And I also invite you, if you have other organizations you'd like to highlight or uplift with this group on the call, put them in the chat. We'd love to see them. Alrighty, a few reminders. If you're having trouble with Zoom while we are on this call, please send me, Kinsey, a private message. You can also send that to my colleague, Kim, who is on this call as well. Oh, and Alex. Hey, Alex Latore as well. We're all here to help from the roundtable. Please do keep your mic on mute unless you're the person speaking so we can all hear each other clearly. We encourage you to use the chat to connect with other folks on the call as well. If you have questions that come up throughout the presentation, please put those in the chat. I'll collect them. There will be some time for Q&A at the end. This call does include captions. You can turn those on by finding the captions button either on your toolbar or under the More section of your toolbar and clicking Show Captions, and they'll start popping up for you. Unless this session is being recorded, and it will be made available to registrants probably next weekish once we get it turned around and uploaded. So look for that resource coming to you from me via email. Also via email, I hope you had a chance to check out the pre-work packet that was put together for us by PFLAG. That will be a really great document moving forward to keep yourself prepared and informed for all of the conversations and topics that we'll be having during this series. And I also just want to highlight the community agreements that were pasted in there, as well as in the email reminding you about the series that went last week. So I will put these in the chat as well, but I would just like to share them again. So this will be a safe space for participants to listen and learn. This will be a space where it is okay to not know words, terms, and concepts. We are acknowledging that everyone has a different starting point in this learning journey. This will be a safe space for the facilitators to share their knowledge on subject matter. This is a space to ask any and all questions in a respectful manner. This is a space to speak from our own experiences and to not generalize groups of people. We understand that it is our responsibility to ensure that all students feel safe, both physically and emotionally, while they are in school. And we understand that this is not a space to voice disapproval of affirming and safety-driven policies. And those are in the chat if you'd like to review them and refer back to them throughout today. And that is quite enough from me. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Philip from PFLAG, who's going to be facilitating our session today. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I have so many butterflies in the best way right now. I am so excited. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I'll introduce myself. My name is Philip. I use he, him, and she, her pronouns. I am a white gender fluid person with, fabulously coiffed brown hair, I like to say, short brown hair and a multicolored dark blues and greens sweater on. My background is blurred. I am very excited to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Do, do, do. Fantastic. All right. Excellent. So yeah, very excited to be here and to be talking with all of y'all and to have a discussion about this work. It's really at the core of what we do at PFLAG. You'll hear a little bit more about who PFLAG is at the beginning. A couple of things before we get started, just to reaffirm some of the community agreement points. I know that we are all coming from different starting points and different understandings of this material, and I really want to embrace that. And so please, with any questions, put them in the chat. I want to make sure that we have as much of a discussion as possible and that we can get to all of your questions. Yeah, very excited to get started. And the last thing is PFLAG a few years ago, we had a 50th anniversary rebranding from the national level, and the slogan now for our organization is Leading with Love. I invite everyone to, with today's presentation and discussion, to really keep that as the lens through all of this work, and by extension, the lens of allyship, of leading with love. You'll hear that a couple more times throughout probably, but really just keeping that in mind with this work, I think, can be really beneficial. But again, to tell you more about who PFLAG is, just to kick us off, and to know where that leading with love comes from, that understanding of wanting to help LGBTQ plus young people. It all started, at least for PFLAG, it all started with a mother and a teacher in Queens. Her name was Jean Manford. She was a elementary school teacher in Queens, and her son Morty had come out to her as gay in the late 60s. If anyone hasn't or if anyone is not familiar, of course, Morty was a part of the LGBTQ civil rights movement of the time. So he was a part of Stonewall and other big demonstrations that were happening and movements that were happening. Part of this, he was a part of a specific demonstration that happened in the early 70s that led him to be severely physically beaten and sent to the hospital. What had struck Jean, when she learned about him being sent to the hospital because of what had happened, was that the doctors were more concerned about her knowing that her son was gay versus his well-being from the incident. And up until this point, her mentality once he came out was very, I love you, but you have your life, I have mine. She was very separate in that way. And it was here that there was a bit of a switch, and she was like, no, I love you and for who you are, and the world needs to know this, and people need to know that is nothing miraculous, just to love your kid for who they are. So she wanted to take more of an active role along with Morty. And a couple of things that she did, I always like to mention, she sent a letter to the New York Post to be published. And it was a different New York Post at the time. It was a letter just to say that she was coming out as the proud parent of a gay son. It was rejected 5 times before it was published. This was in the early 70s. And she had also told Morty, she said, I want to march with you in the next Christopher Street March for Liberation, which we now know as the Pride March at the end of June. And but she told him, I want to march with you as a proud parent. I want people to know this. So this is you see in the photo on the left is an image of all of the people marching, and then you see there at the very front, holding the sign is Jean, and then next to her is Morty, her son. In the center is a close-up of the sign saying, parents of gays, unite in support for our children. And then the other one there is another example of some proud parents who have marched with PFLAG. So what had happened here is that she was like, I'm marching with you on this march. This was June of 1972. And there was reported to be a small commotion on the march. A commotion almost as if someone notable was on the march, like who was creating, what is all this ruckus happening that is leading to people curious who was marching with them. And it wasn't anyone, of celebrity status. It was just simply a mother that was creating all this commotion. The fact that a parent was marching on the march was making this big of a difference. People were coming up to her, queer young people were coming up to her. They were asking, how are you doing this? How did you make this decision? How can you talk to my parents about this? Like, how are you understanding this? And on that march in 72, she and Morty decided they could take this work one step further and create that space for parents to talk. So she could talk to those parents and other parents who were interested or who are trying to learn how to accept their children more. So in March of 1973, in the church, in the basement of what is now known as the Church of the Village on 13th and 7th, in Manhattan, she started the very first PFLAG support group meeting between parents. This, of course, one meeting has expanded to multiple chapters, to multiple states, to what we now know as our national organization. We are all across the country. We, of course, expanded our work in understanding that this is not just, of course, gay and lesbian, but an entire broad, beautiful spectrum of LGBTQ plus people. And that is really where PFLAG is standing now. Just to quickly run through what we are as an organization and as the New York City chapter. I also want to make sure you know this simply because we are a resource, not only for people in the community, but specifically for the young people that you work with and for the families that you work with. If they need something like this. Our work in the city in almost every facet is offered free of charge, especially specifically our support groups. They're that same peer-to-peer support that Jean and Morty had created way back in the early 70s. But not just our general support group for anyone to attend. We also have a myriad of support groups to meet people where they're at. So I'm thinking of our Black family circle specifically for Black families. We have El Amor Hace la Familia, which is our bilingual Spanish-English group. We have a group for dads. We have a group for parents who have kids who are not only gender diverse, but neurodiverse as well. And so really we meet a lot of different and try to continue to create new groups to meet these lived experiences that people are having, knowing that their identity as being a part of this community meets those experiences as well. Also, of course, we have our Safe Schools program. Some of you might have heard of the Respect for All initiative in New York City Public Schools. That is a large part of where our work in in public schools comes from. We are free in all public schools and sliding scale with private and charter independent schools, but we work to really increase that opportunity of creating that equal environment, not just at the home, but also in the school as well. So we do in-class workshops, we have family workshops, PTA meetings, GSAs. We're in as many GSAs as we can, really just trying to create that environment as best as possible, not just in home, but in the school. And then lastly, we have our inclusive communities, creating that greater community education. So not only are we tabling at every Pride we can get our hands on, but we have free events that we hold as well. For instance, we are very grateful to hold an event like this with Arts and Education Roundtable. We have an event, a quarterly event currently with ATLS, the Advocates for Trans, the Trans Law Advocacy Group at Fordham Law of trans law students. We've been hosting quarterly name and gender change workshops for minors and their families. So again, we're trying to meet people where they are at, especially in the current administration, to really increase advocacy, but also understanding how we can increase that equity. So that is who we are. That is PFLAG in a nutshell. But I really want to just briefly cover the why, what brought us here, and why we believe this work is important, just as you believe this work is important. And part of that why is looking at some statistics of where school environments are right now. And we are finding these statistics saying that this is not only a national issue, but a city issue as well. We know that 68% of LGBTQ students feel unsafe at school because of who they are, because of their sexual identity, their gender identity, and their gender expression. And then not only are they feeling this in the classroom with their peers, with their students, but they're feeling this amongst staff as well. So 61.5% of students do not report incidents because they do not think the school staff would do anything. So that is very broadly looking at the country, but specifically in New York City, we are seeing that it is no better here as well, knowing that LGBTQ plus students are 2 times more likely to be bullied or skip school, and 3 times more likely to contemplate or attempt suicide. So these are very heavy statistics. I want to offer this is more of a grounding statistic to really understand, and maybe, of course, if you've heard this before, just to reaffirm how life-saving this work can be an ally for these kids. And statistically, we know how powerful your work can be. And this is the one I always love to share, is that we know that LGBTQ youth who report having at least one accepting adult are 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt. When that adult is a teacher in their life, it jumps up to 43% less likely. So I want to really uplift that statistic and know that your work in these schools and your work working with these young people as an accepting adult with where you are makes a huge difference. And yeah, and now I want to show you some more ways that you can create that foundation and build that allyship. With this part here, we're going to go over some best practices, both proactive and responsive. I want to look at specifically when a child comes out, but also really how can you create that environment and what are the ways, the practical ways, especially as a teaching artist, maybe if you don't have your own, permanent classroom and you're kind of a traveling teaching artist, how can you still create that accepting environment? So there are many, many ways you can do this. After that, I'm going to share a personal story to go off of the original core work of what PFLAG is. And then lastly, before we open it up for questions, I'm going to go into policy. I know that is everyone's favorite part is policies, especially the many policies and laws that exist in New York. But I want to offer, I'm really saving the best for last with that because so much of what New York City has for policy, as well as New York State, is on your side. And it's something you can lean on, even right now when everything seems to be all over the place. But that's what we're going to be going over today. But before we go into any foundations of allyship, I wanted to ask if we could if anyone would want to, turn off your mute and to speak up. I'm curious if someone would love to share one instance of what you might do if a student comes out to you.
I would ask them if they're okay and what they need to feel safe in the moment.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love that encourages and centers safety of the student. I think that is most important, right? Like what I said before with leading with love, centering the humanity of the child who comes out. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Any others? Any others?
Well,
I think I heard someone.
I think you heard two people.
Oh, sorry. My shared screen is making the tech hard to see. If someone doesn't mind sharing again.
Well, I'm neurodiverse, trans, and non-binary, and I'm out with all of my students, which feels more interesting these days. And I think what I'd like to do is go for the proactive, which is I usually weave into arts teaching an opportunity for people to disclose privately. So with a high school class with 28 students, 26 countries, we were doing group spoken word poetry, and I had the students, I was partnered with the teacher who was moving with them as a cohort, and who said to me, 6 classes in, I feel like I'm getting to know them as people, which was terrifying since he was in year 2. I had the students write on a small piece of paper their names and one thing that identified them, so I could put them in the groups, and I said that they wouldn't have to say it, no one else would see it. It was going to get burned, not the teacher, not anybody. And there were some kids in very conservative households who came out to me, and the teacher knew that had happened, but not whom, and wasn't part of dividing the kids into groups, but the way the teens inhabited the room changed after that.
I really love that you kept it private and offered that private accessibility for coming out. Um, Especially, I mean, I think we can all agree, especially at this time, um, especially myself included and anyone else who might have been in a similar situation, as a queer person at that age, that is that is in the forefront of your mind, right? And to give them a chance to just privately express that, um, can make a world of a difference. So thank you so much. Incredible. Okay, so what an amazing start. So just going off of, I'm already hearing some great examples of allyship. Knowing that someone has come out to you is already a sign of trust, right? Where they trust you enough with this information, and that they want to share with you. So I'll move into that a second. But the first thing, of course, I want to say with in regards to building foundations of allyship is educating yourself and educating others. I believe that when you're creating this allyship, right, the best thing to do is to spread the knowledge as you receive it and not shy away from these conversations. I already heard some great examples right there. Educating others, right, not shying away, especially when you're saying like you are open to it, you're being proactive. If you are comfortable enough to disclose your own identity as being in the community, you feel that is important. I know for me personally, in my own teaching practice, I always want to make sure I do, because that creates that conversation and opens up myself to that conversation. You do not need to be in the community, of course, to be open to this conversation. I found myself being open to conversation with a student whose gender identity completely was not how my brain worked. And he chose to have this conversation with me about it. And, I did not understand half of what he was talking about when we were having this conversation, but I wanted to make sure it was open for him anyway. So finding that way to be open with this conversation is great. If a student does choose to come out to you, of course, what are the ways that you can create that environment, right? Being responsive in those moments. These here are always an incredible selection of do's and don'ts. The first thing I always want to mention with these do's and don'ts here, right? Do ask a lot of open-ended questions. Do listen intently to feelings and experiences. Do share your own lived experiences if relevant. Do find out what support is needed, right? These are all examples of what you would do if a student shares anything personal and important to you, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be LGBTQ specific, which is one of my favorite parts of specifically how to be an ally, is that there's so much crossover, and it really just boils down to, are you respecting the student? Are you centering their humanity? Are you leading with love and making sure that they have an equitable environment? So there are very simple ways that you can make that happen. One of our volunteers who joins us with our Safe Schools programming always mentions in his story about when his cousin came out to him, was he, froze a little bit. He was like, I'm straight, I'm not in the community, I'm cisgendered. But I said, tell me more. And, providing just that open-ended, like, I want to hear more, right? Even if I'm not fully an understanding of what's going on, I want to provide that space for you. So knowing when you can provide that space to listen intently, and then give support when needed, finding those resources for them if they need that. So these are ways, of course, in how you can help someone when they come out, but then thinking, okay, so what about the rest of the class? Or what about something I might hear in the hallway? How can we be a little more responsive in making sure we help someone be more understanding for their own peers in the community, or for their own peers in the classroom? And one of the first things we always want to say with any language that might appear or any instance that might appear is, we always try to, at PFLAG, lead with curiosity over judgment. This is one huge way, I would say, I always try to frame every question we get when we go into classrooms. Of course, these kids are engaged. They might be asking us a question. And let's say if I'm going in with our Safe Schools program and a kid asks me, what about this trans person who's with you? What was her name before she transitioned? And this is a best case scenario where the student is simply, curious, does not know the ideas of what is called a dead name, right? They might not know that in the trans community, oftentimes this is something that the trans person is a name they don't share anymore. This is part of their past. But they were curious anyway. So finding ways to lead with curiosity over judgment. Now, that is a very like kind-hearted example. Sometimes the opinions that are expressed are not as kind-hearted. And when we've seen those as well, you know, we always want to interrupt every time. I always want to implore finding different ways to how should we respond after that? So questioning, educating, or echoing are examples of what you can do. Of course, question them, you know, what did you mean by that? Could you explain what you mean? Which has happened to me before as well. Knowing when to educate to them, pointing out how what they said might be harmful or is harmful, right? It's saying, you know, I'm surprised to hear you say that, especially if you already have that relationship with the student. You know, you've heard or expected a different perspective from them, and to hear this from them, you know, how can we make that an educating moment? And then knowing how to echo if someone else is already being an upstander in that moment. So this is the main point of here is how can you be that upstander and how you can create that responsive conversation for the allyship that's required in this moment. In looking for any specific responses, we like to point out a couple. I have them listed right here. These are just a couple of responses that we have created, some that we have used in our own work. I always recommend people, you know, maybe take a picture with your phone if you're looking at this on your computer screen. I'm also happy to send this over, to Kinsey and to the roundtable. So you have this here. I know it'll be in the recording, but just so you have a written list of some ready responses, things just to keep in the back of your mind for when you hear any sort of language that is, you know, harmful to the peers around them from the other students or from teachers that you might work with, right? Like this, you know, it's not just with student to student, right? This kind of harmful language can happen with other teachers. So knowing how you can have those responses. So these are all very responsive, of course, but then how can we create a more proactive and more welcoming environment as an ally for these young learners? So some of these, of course, are all pretty, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Obvious. You know, having a lot of us already have our pronouns in our bios, in our Zoom tags, right? There's so many ways you can do that as well. Having a rainbow pride or pin or sticker. We always recommend too, if you have a lanyard at school, finding some sort of pin that works for that, right? There's so many ways that you can have this. I have spoken to kids, different students in the public school system. And of course, the answer is a wide range, like saying, like, what would you want to see your teachers have? So you know that you're in a safe space. I've had a student say, you know, the rainbow flag, I would never see that in this school. So to have this one teacher have a rainbow flag meant a lot to me. And I've had another middle schooler tell me, you know, I feel like every teacher has a rainbow flag in their classroom and it's lip service. But I remember one teacher had a flag that said protect trans lives on it, and I felt safer in that teacher's classroom. So, you know, in that perspective, it really looks at how can you read, you know, the environment that you're in for the school that you're in. How can you really look at the community that you're working with and really go from there? Or honestly, if you know any kids who are already out in the community, asking them, right? What do you want me to do to make sure that you are feeling safe? Like, what can I have to make sure that you feel safe? So there are many ways that can go about as well. Really quickly, just to cover with the bios, we'll be covering this more in policy, what this looks like in New York City school policy, but of course, being visibly supportive. It goes without saying, but respecting if a student comes out as trans, they use a new name, a new set of pronouns, knowing that it takes a long time, or it can take a while for you to adjust, but knowing that as long as you're practicing and you are using that name and pronouns for the student that they have chosen to use immediately, switching to that immediately as soon as they ask is paramount. And yeah, I'll be going over more of what that looks like in policy in a little bit. But before I do that, I want to share with you more of a story This is one of my favorite parts and one of the reasons why I love this work with PFLAG. Our Safe Schools program, we go into schools, share our stories with students of how allies have helped us and what was important to us and how that made such a benefit. I want to quickly share with you my own understandings of how an ally, a particular ally when I was a young person, helped me in schools. To give you more of a kind of a perspective, a context, I want to tell you where I'm from. I am not from New York. I was born and raised in South Carolina. I am a queer person of religious traumatic experience, as some of us might be. I grew up in the Bible Belt, and I've had some eighth graders ask me what that is. And I say, well, instead of delis, we have churches and Chick-fil-A's on every corner, just to give you an idea. So coming from the Bible Belt, it was all around me of many, many messages of who I was supposed to be growing up. And by the time I was in the fifth grade, I already had not only an understanding of, what all the churches around me were saying, that, there may be a billboard that has homosexuality and flames on it. And so I'm like, okay, so I'm hearing that they're telling me this isn't great. But then at the same time, I grew up myself Roman Catholic, and it was my favorite thing in the world. And because I felt like I was in such a close, tightly knit community of people. And around the same time that I was hearing all these churches telling me that what I was feeling was wrong growing up and realizing that I was a queer person, that's when I learned that my own church that I thought I would be a part of for the rest of my life was telling me that I was wrong. So I was feeling and I was witnessing and I was seeing all of these instances of how I felt was wrong and was bad, and I should make, I shouldn't follow this anymore. And I realized, okay, of course, I'm just gonna like pray the gay away, like many of us in the, in the South, we find our own ways to get rid of all of these feelings because they're terrible and they're all going to send us to hell and whatever. But of course, we know that that's not how this works, right? And as many times as I tried to stop these feelings from happening, they didn't. And as I got older into sixth and seventh grade, I started to take even bigger swings, I like to say, to stop these feelings from happening. And I took those bigger swings in the form of isolation. I would isolate myself. I would push myself away from people. I would push myself away from my friends and my family. I pushed myself away from my very best friend. And that's one thing that really, I would say, surprises students when I tell them that it was easier for me to lose my friends, including my best friend, because my best friend, for instance, I started to have feelings towards. And that was something that was like the end of the world, right? For a seventh grader, as I was like, if I admit any of these feelings, my friend is, I have no idea what's going to happen. But I realize that means I'm going to have to come out. And if I come out, growing up in a very Catholic household, my parents are going to reject me. I feel like my community is going to reject me. That's what they're telling me, right? I feel that the churches around here are going to reject me. I'm going to lose my community. I'm going to lose my future, my afterlife. Everything is at stake in those moments. And that's really when my grades tanked. Almost immediately I switched to D's and F's, and I didn't care about anything. And the only thing that mattered was not being gay. And the first adult that I ever came out to is the ally I want to tell you more about. She was my English teacher in high school, which many other queer people might say is the quintessential queer experience. But this was my English teacher in high school who I came out to, and before I came out to her, I went to a Catholic school, and it is at least at the Catholic school where I came from, this was all against the rules, right? Having a program like this, having a GSA, having a rainbow flag, right? Having all of these things presented to students to promote, quote unquote, a gay lifestyle would be against the rules. And my teacher knew this, and she wasn't trying to break those rules, but we could really trust and respect her. And looking back, I'm still in touch with her, and it's really interesting to hear from her all the ways that she would try to create that acceptable environment. So, for instance, as an English teacher, anytime there was an author, she would put in her curriculum if that author had a partner who was a husband, or it was a gay man with a husband or a lesbian with a wife, or maybe that was implied or something, she would always try to bring that in. So a very simple way of creating that LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, just to show the students that this is something that is important and necessary and just part of life. So, you know, like me and other queer people, as she mentioned, in the future, caught on, and I realized that she was someone I could trust with this information, and I came out to her. And you'll hear more about specific New York City policy, but for me personally, this was very huge, and it shook me to my core because I was telling her something that she could have done any information with, right? There was nothing stopping her from telling my parents, from telling the administration, from telling the principal. But she told me that she wouldn't tell anyone. She told me that it was, you know, it was a secret that she would keep. And also looking back on it, it was probably a moment of just her saying this and then being a teacher and moving on, right? She has, you know, 4 million other things to go about in her day. You know, she's trying to make sure that everything is taken care of. She's grading papers. She's doing all the things she needs to do. She might have just forgotten about it. But for me, the level of humanity I felt was something I hadn't felt from another adult in a very long time, from another person in a very long time. For someone to recognize me for who I am, to be okay with who I am, really threw me for a loop in the best way. And I didn't immediately tell other people, but I knew that I could begin to tell other people. And for me, slowly, it began a very slow, strategic coming out process for me. And it was a huge turning point to have that teacher tell that to me. Looking back, you know, I heard that she found other ways with other students to create that inclusive environment. She became that one teacher that everyone came out to at this tiny Catholic school. Eventually, a student wanted to turn to have a GSA. Which I didn't explain for those who are unaware. It is now called a Gender and Sexuality Alliance, but originally was known as a Gay Straight Alliance. It's an after-school LGBTQ and ally drop-in hangout session with for kids in the community and allies to hang out. And many times this is the only place that a kid can feel safe in their school. So a kid wanted to have one at the Catholic school I went to. So she said, just name it after the Pope and then they won't come after you. So he called it like the Pope. It was Pope Francis at the time, if there are any Catholics in the room. It was the Pope Francis forum for civil discussion or something like that. They named it that, but all the kids knew it was the GSA. And so that's how it started. And it was just very funny. So anyway, I always like to bring in this story with this teacher and how she not only helped me, but she helped many other kids who came after me simply because she saw them where they were at. She was respecting them for who they were, even in a particular environment that, you know, maybe promoted otherwise. So always want to bring that in. So thank you very much. And now, after all those warm fuzzies, I want to take you straight into policy. So, as I said before, the policy that New York City has, that New York City Department of Education has, and New York State has, is on your side. Unlike in my own situation where I felt like left to the winds, there are many, many, many laws and rules in place for these young people, especially right now. I want to say I'm going to have some resources at the end. And I just want to also acknowledge that, especially with what we're seeing in the current administration, it's happening very, very quickly. We are seeing, you know, one day it's an executive order, the next day it's a judge blocking the order or putting a restraining order on it. And we're seeing in real time this indecisiveness happening, and we're not sure what to believe. So what I want to really uplift and strengthen is that the laws that are in place are still the laws that are in place. They are not leaving. They are going to be here. It is codified in our Constitution. That's what I want to start with. With this past election in November, we codified in our New York State Constitution in regards to equal protection under the law, right? No person shall, because of including sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression should be subjected to any discrimination in their civil rights by any other person. So we know that it is in our state constitution that any kid who is discriminated because of who they are based on their sexuality or their gender identity or expression is discrimination under the law. So that's just to kick us off, but that is not the end and not the last of all of the laws that are in place. The next one I want to cover for you is particularly the Dignity Act, or the New York State's Dignity for All Students Act, or DASA, as it is also called. This is particularly in educational institutions, so seek to provide public elementary and secondary school students with a safe and supportive environment free from discrimination, intimidation, taunting, harassment, and bullying. So this is particularly looking at any sort of situation where if a student is subjected to any discrimination on a protected class or bullying on a protected class, that is harassment. So, and that is sexual orientation, gender expression, or gender identity. Because of this as well, it says provided that in public schools other than charter schools shall instruction be provided as part of a component on civility, citizenship, and character education, right? We're looking at also, because of what DASA is telling us with the objectives and requirements of DASA, we are looking at specifically the importance of an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum. So the NYCPS Office of General Counsel, so that is the big lawyers up in NYCPS land, New York City Public Schools land, this is their advice. So New York City Public Schools doesn't land any hot water, that LGBTQ plus curricula is considered not only recommended, but mandatory to have. And because this curricula is mandatory, parental opt-out is not an option. So if you, in your curriculum that you are creating for your students, if you have any sort of LGBTQ plus inclusivity in your curriculum, so that is characters, that is artists, that is, a specific historical figure, the list goes on. If you have any sort of LGBTQ plus themes in your work, parental opt-out is not an option. That includes, you do not need to send a letter home saying that there is LGBTQ plus themes. This is also K through 12, by the way. So even all the way down to kindergarten, this still counts. And then there is no opt-out policy. Nothing is allowed. This is also straight off of the DOE's website, where it says curriculum is both a window and a mirror, both allowing students who are not LGBTQ plus to see the experiences of others, and also providing a reflection of LGBTQ plus students. And these efforts include incorporating LGBTQ plus history, reading books by these authors, ensuring sexual health curriculum is inclusive for all identities, etc. So any way that you find a way to incorporate these themes, that is not going to prevent you from still teaching the work you want to teach. And in fact, it is encouraged. So if you are already thinking about adding more LGBTQ inclusive curricula into your work, please do it. Past this, I want to touch on harassment just one more time to show where it's specific in the DOE's policy, and that is in the chancellor's regulations. So bullying behavior directed at a target is also based on a protected class, is defined as harassment, and this is actual or perceived. So these are the specific chancellor's regulations that we look at, looking at unlawful discrimination, harassment by NYCPS employees based on a protected class, and then student-to-student harassment, discrimination, intimidation, and or bullying. I want to say also to this, this does not go for just students. This also applies to families as well. And you'll hear more in regards to in the next session, but this harassment can, this chancellor's regulations can be in your favor as well. If you find any sort of harassment based on your sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression in the building as well. So this is going back to the New York State Constitution, the New York State Human Rights Law, and the New York City Human Rights Law, that we're all looking at if you're bullied or taunted or discriminated against who you are as a person, for your sexual identity, or gender expression, that is considered discrimination and harassment. For here, actual or perceived looks at specifically, of course, actually, if this is actually a part of your identity. If you are harassed or discriminated because your identity is assumed and it is not your identity, that is perceived. So that is still included under this protected class as well. So many, many laws are in place to help you. The last part of policy that I want to make sure I cover particularly is looking at some guidelines that are also in place to support transgender and gender expansive students. So here, the first big one is I want to look at if a student comes out to you, and we can also discuss this in the Q&A, and uses a new name and a new set of pronouns that they would like you to use, that according to NYCPS policy, if you are working in a New York City public school, there is an immediate switch to make sure you honor that student's name and pronouns. One thing I always say too, if a student comes out to you, you also say, who have you told? Have you told anyone else, right? Because this might be a situation where the kid says, oh yeah, everyone else already knows, you're just the last person I told. And you're kind of like, okay, that feels great, I guess. Or this could be a situation where they say, you're the first person I've told. I haven't even told my other teacher yet. I haven't told my dad at home, he'll kill me, right? These are very real conversations that could happen. And so if that happens, of course, this kid has trusted you with an immense, huge secret. I always say thank you in those moments. I always say thank you for sharing this with me. Sometimes the kid might want you to tell other people. I always recommend, if that happens, getting that confirmation from the student. And if not, then working with the student, being like, when would you like other people to know? Like, let me know when you want someone to know, or if you would like to start coming out. It is according to this policy that students can discuss and express their gender identity openly and with whom, and they can share as much private information with other people. So in the end, it is up to them. They don't need to tell you anything about that. But it can always be helpful to just have that listening ear, ask those opening questions to see if you can help. If the student has decided to go ahead and use this name at home or at school, then write all non-permanent records must reflect this change immediately. So we're talking about any just paper assignments that they're turning in. They can use their new name and their chosen pronouns. That is a cast list that goes up, right? That is considered a temporary record. If you're working on a play at school, that is a program, right? With anything for maybe a presentation or a recital, right? Anything that is a temporary, considered a non-permanent or temporary record. So to help with this, a permanent record in this case would be the attendance database on the school for the whole entire DOE, their attendance base, a diploma, an IEP, right? Any of those more permanent, specific records, that is still going to have the name that they were originally enrolled in the school with. You can use a name and gender change request form to switch that. That requires a parent guardian signature if the kid is under 18. So that is a barrier. And if the kid comes to you about this and asks you about changing, maybe they want their attendance to reflect otherwise, you can say, I can make a note of it, like on a piece of paper, but the actual database needs the name and gender change request form. So that covers that. This here specifically, if a student, of course, they ask you to change, right? They want you to change their name and their pronouns, right? You make that immediate switch. This is where that leading with love and centering humanity, not just the humanity of the student, but your own humanity can come in, right? Because we know that if you are learning a new name and a new pronoun, a new set of pronouns for a kid, especially if you've worked with the kid for a very long time, that can take a little while for the rewiring to happen in the brain. That is okay, right? You are human, we are all human, and that happens to all of us. And that accidental misgendering might happen. If that does happen, just simply correcting yourself and moving on is the best way to move forward, because again, that still centers the humanity of the student and that doesn't put any sort of onus of an apology onto the student. We don't want to, and I, of course, I have been in my past have been a victim of this as well, where I have misgendered, and then I say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Please, I'm getting this right. I promise." They know you're trying. They know that you're working on this. So just a quick shift and moving on is the best thing that will help you there. It's when you intentionally misgender that you are going against New York City public school policy, as well as New York State discrimination. So there are many rules in place to make sure that this doesn't happen. If a student, lastly, just to cover all of these big pieces here, if a student comes out to you and they ask you not to share this with anyone, even if a student tells you not to share this with anyone, actually, you cannot disclose this conversation without the student's expressed permission. And this is in New York City public school policy. This is for any adult who works in a public school. So not just a teacher who's there, the guidance counselor or like the bus driver or school safety. This also includes people who work in the school as a vendor. So if you're like a vendor going into a school with your programming, this policy still counts. You cannot share this information. You cannot share that conversation with anyone. If the student has come out to you, there are only, I believe, 3 reasons that you're allowed to disclose the student's identity without their permission. One is you have their written permission. The other is they are in a health emergency and who they are as their identity that they have disclosed with you is pertinent to the health emergency. And the last one is a court subpoena. So other than that, you are to keep that information confidential unless the student tells you you can tell other people. The student has given you express written permission. You can let other people know. And that is so the student has a safe space to disclose and to talk about their identity. That's the goal of this, is to make sure that they have that safe space. Because again, looking at these last 2 points here, we always want to bold asserted at school. Oftentimes, we all know this, a student may act and be one way at school versus one way at home because of the difference between their school life and their home life. And we can never know, nor can we control what their home life looks like. And so knowing that a student might just be safer in their identity at school, we want to give them the chance to be safer at school. Now, there are a lot of ways, right, that this can come into play, right? Maybe the student has a project that they take home that they want their parents to see, and they've written their name on the project, right? Be it an art project or whatever, and they have written their chosen name on it, but their parents don't know that they're going by a chosen name at school. So that is another conversation you can have with the student to talk to them, to just assure them, to be like, hey, I just want you to know you want your parents to see this project you made that's really, really cool. I want them to see it them too if you want to, but you've also written your name here, or you would like to write your name here. Let's talk about that. Maybe you write it on the art project when you get back to school, or find ways to work with the student in this, right? And it's one of the examples of how allyship is that continuing conversation. We try to give as many steps for allyship that can help you in building those foundations, but in the end, it is a continued conversation. And the best thing you can do is to continue, right, to assert or to lead with love and to center their humanity. So finding those ways to make that as accessible as possible, and understanding and having the kid understanding through conversation of knowing where their safety is paramount. And then lastly, every school must have at least one gender neutral bathroom for student use only. That is required. This is an agency building requirement. So any New York City agency building, so not just DOE, but any other public building must have at least one gender neutral bathroom. And so like a single stall bathroom in this case. In buildings, in New York City agency buildings, if you work in a school that's like multiple schools to a building, that might mean that your gender neutral bathroom is not on your school's floor. Unfortunately, that is still in compliance. That is something we are working on. And I am working on with the LGBTQ office. But as of right now, that is a one bathroom per building situation versus per school, multiple schools in a building situation. We are almost at the end. I have talked so much. And so please, if you have any questions, I think I saw some like notifications appearing in the chat. So I'm very excited to see what questions come up from this. But the last thing I always want to say in the end is that, you know, whether you're in a place of support, acceptance, or understanding, you can show up and speak out. Your voice matters. We know your voice is beneficial. Your voice for these students is beneficial, and the work that you can do for these students is so helpful. Even no matter where you are at yourself, knowing you can still be just as important of an ally. The last thing I want to show you before we go in is some resources and contacts. These are some resources that's looking at currently right now that can be very beneficial with this work, and especially with this work in 2025. And these are resources that you can offer to your students as well if they are looking for any resources to help them. The first one I always recommend is Advocates for Trans Equality, a very broad organization with legal and educational resources for understanding state and federal laws, as well as policies for trans people. They have a lot of incredible resources regarding documents and name changes. So I always recommend going to them as well. PFLAG NYC, we have all of our free support meetings for parents and loved ones of LGBTQ plus people. We also hold events with the LGBTQ office and other youth LGBTQ orgs in the city to offer the youth events where we can. And of course, we offer our quarterly name and gender changed events and workshops with Atlas to make sure that we provide that resource as best as possible. Lastly, if a student is just looking for a queer person to talk to, I always recommend the Trevor Project or the Trans Lifeline. The Trevor Project is for any LGBTQ plus youth to talk to someone. They do not need to be in crisis to utilize this hotline, so I always recommend using that if the student necessarily is or isn't. That is the same for the Trans Lifeline, but this one is specifically for trans youth to speak to a trans adult. Awesome. So then I will just keep this up before we go into our questions. If you would like to hear more from PFLAG, if you would love to have us in a school, maybe if you work at a school and you're like, wow, this could really, the teachers here could all use a PD from PFLAG. We are happy to come in and to work with them. You can reach out to my own email. I'll put it in the chat as well, or to my boss, Clark. And we will get to you as quickly as we can. But with that said, I am going to stop sharing and move into some discussions. I see so many questions in the chat or messages, and I would love to hear from everyone. And also, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. I love that. I usually thank them for being vulnerable with me and trying not to project my experiences onto them, even though it can be tempting as a gay and trans person myself. Oh my gosh, yes, Rosie. I have found myself in those moments where, because like for me personally, right, my gender identity came into my life later than understanding my sexuality, and these kids will come up and I'll be like, I just want to tell you so many things, and I have to. You have to experience the world by yourself, and you must learn things your own way. Yeah, so I totally get that. Thank you. Yeah, power in having a teaching artist or other adult in the room simply be comfortable with being out. There is a lot of power to that, and that can be something that can be really, really beneficial to kids. I worked in a classroom, and first of all, they brought in PFLAG for a bunch of seniors. And I was like, they're 1 foot out the door. Why are we talking to seniors? But okay, I mean, everyone needs this work. And so we go into the classroom and we start our presentation, and we're talking to the kids, we're having a discussion. And there were 2 seniors. This is a high school in Manhattan. There were 2 seniors on a Chromebook. It was assuming a boy and a girl couple, and they were like cuddling, watching something on this Chromebook, like with headphones in, just like in their own. It was like movie night for them, and and they were like, desk was right here, and so I was just kind of like, I can go. Like, do you want me to make this? Do you need time alone? Like, you are enjoying this television show. Like, we don't reprimand. It's always the teacher that we do this programming in that does any sort of reprimanding. And teacher did not care. And but we pushed through and did the presentation anyway. And they left and whatever. And then at the very end, another kid came up to me and was like, my best friend goes to another school and would never dare coming out because there's nothing like this there. And I want to talk to him and let him know that this program exists and you can come. Thank you so much for being here. And it just like completely changed my perspective on that class. And knowing how, I mean, and we all know this, right? You can reach out to at least one kid, it can be worth it. And so knowing that doing the small things of allyship for young people can create a world of a difference for them. But yeah, what questions do you all have?
Hi, can I ask a question? I don't know
Please.
how to raise the hand, sorry.
Me neither, no worries.
I have a question that is about supporting LGBTQ youth in a classroom setting, but it may be slightly off topic for what it sounds like this space is for. However, I have a scenario to share. And so I'm a cisgendered female, use she, her pronouns, and I co-teach at an after-school program and a day camp program with several teachers. So there's always two of us in the room. We have several educators that we teach with who are of trans experience. And this scenario has happened two separate. Oh, and I should also say there are also trans children, trans-identified children in our program. Always, there always is one trans-identified child, in part because it's my child and my child goes to the program. So anyway, so the program is very trans affirming. And two separate times we had a kid focus on a trans educator's gender identity in a manner that we all think as educators that was consistent with their development level, but obviously we're not prepared by their school or by their parents to understand that gender is the expression of an individual, and there's no negotiation once that's been shared. And in both cases, the kid, who was about 8 or 9 years old, male identified in this moment, and it was like telling this person like, no, you're a woman. And so after talking through it, like a few of us, like the issues that come out of that is one, cisgendered and transgendered co-teachers working together in a supportive environment, so that there's no direct, like the interrogation of gender doesn't get directed at a trans body. And also this is supporting kids because we are demonstrating a very profound example about gender identity that will be a process for kids moving forward in the future, and is the lived experience of kids that are in the classroom right now. And so I think we feel like we handled it well, but our trans educator shared that they felt really conflicted because they felt triggered by having had that experience in the world with lots of adults. And at the same time, they're an incredible educator. And they're like, okay, how do I lean into being an educator in this moment? At the same time, I'm having all of these feelings that are really making this difficult. So maybe that's my way of asking, like, how do you see this connecting with what we're talking about here? And also, do you think there might be a different webinar in the future for supporting trans educators in classroom settings?
So yeah, would love to do a webinar specifically on that. And I know GenderWise would as well. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, so I immediately looked at specifically, you said the kid was 8. Yeah, I immediately looked at specifically the slide where I mentioned leading with curiosity over judgment. And this is only thinking from my own experience when we have done some elementary programming and we've talked to students about identity. When we go in at PFLAG into elementary classrooms, we don't or we focus on specifically identity, who a person is. That's the biggest thing we focus on as well. And so with that, when we've had students make any comments like this, we try to lead with curiosity over judgment. In that case specifically, with similar ones that have happened, we'll say, what do you mean by that? Or can you explain what you mean? A lot of times, especially at that age, they're going off of what they've taken in and what they have heard from or what they have seen, and it helps to open up a conversation of what identity is for someone and what gender identity is for someone, and saying, now, okay, so you said that, but if well, first of all, I would say too, before this, is that thank you for pointing out to not put the onus of this on the trans person, and that there are also cisgendered people in the room, and how a cisgendered person, this is an excellent time for them to speak up in this situation. But in this moment, I would be, well, what do you mean when you say that, right? What do you mean, that person is a woman, right? This person told you their name and their pronouns and how they feel about themselves, right? At PFLAG, we always mention to kids, your gender identity is how you feel about yourself. So in this case, this person, how they feel about themselves is who they are, is, a trans person, just to say, if the person identifies as a man, right? I can't remember if you mentioned this person's full identity, but if the person identifies as a man, you're saying, well, they feel that this is who they are. So we want to make sure that we respect them for who they are and for who they tell us that they are. And so you don't want to assume who someone is, right? And so finding ways to make that connection. That said, Rachel put in the chat that GenderWise will be touching more on this in our next session on March 10th. So please stick around for the March 10th session, and we will go more further into that as well. But thank you so much for bringing that up. That absolutely has something to do with this work. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'll start with Ed. Do you have advice for adults working with students who think they might be trans, but they might not be sure and are possibly exploring their identity? Yes, absolutely. So, the first thing we always say is we don't want to be prescriptive. We don't want to give any kids, any sort of, you should be, right? Are you thinking about this? Why not be this? I never try to be prescriptive in that. I've also heard specifically from the LGBTQ office that is against policy. But that said, you can still create that open environment for them to explore their identity. Can you find ways for the kids can you find ways for gender inclusivity for the students in the classroom? One thing that we always say is that, instead of lining up boys and girls line up, which is, you hear more in elementary, of course, but instead of saying boys and girls line up, can you say, artists and scholars, or find some way that connects to whatever you're working on, or the material, or maybe it's the mascot of the school, finding ways to create that inclusivity, including any sort of books with themes, right? Specifically about a young person who is trans, or who is non-binary, or who is any sort of gender non-conforming, be it their identity or their expression, right? Just creating that open environment. And then just saying, having that rainbow flag, or having something that says that you are an ally, you can always talk to me, you are safe with me. Finding those pins, or that whatever you wear, to help signify that you're an ally, right? Just showing that you're creating that open environment, and they can always come to you to talk to you about it. I think is the best way to do it, right? I think lastly, I would say, if the school that you work at has a GSA, letting the kids in your classroom know that GSA exists, and that, that they can talk to or they can attend that GSA, maybe having a flyer of it in the room, or having any sort of way that the kids know that that exists, that you can point them to that safe space as well. So just continuing the openness is really doing the best work right there. Awesome. So Alicia, you're welcome, Ed. Alicia, my son's friends have come out to me. I display facts openly about inclusivity. I have a progressive plan for my car. Is that what you call it? Yeah, progress. Yes. I usually start with my best friend is gay. How do I say this in the best way? Oh, so you're saying, how do I, be an ally and talk about how I have friends in the community? Maybe I one way that I've always helped with this is I talk about my twin sibling, and I automatically I specifically am like my twin sibling, and they, who uses they them pronouns because they identify as non-binary, without going into a full spiel like that. I'll just talk about my twin sibling in an instance, and I'll use they them pronouns in that moment. Sometimes it comes up in that moment where some kid will ask, well, is your brother or your sister? And I'll be like, it's my sibling. Thank you for asking, right? And just finding ways to bring that into the conversation. And if they continue to ask, it happens more specifically because of my work. But, finding ways to be like, they identify as non-binary and that's just how they feel about themselves. For your friend, right? I usually start with my best friend is gay. Yeah, I mean, I think, talking about and making sure that that they, when they come out to you, you can say like, I always want to make sure I am as open and as inclusive as I can. I think with what you're doing right now is already an excellent start. And it already shows that people know that they can trust you and that they can come out to you. So it sounds like you're already doing it in an excellent way. But just keeping it up in this way, and talking about more ways that you have are a part of an inclusive community as an ally. Yeah, yeah. And the vernacular is changing very fast. I've had kids who come up to me who are in middle school and they'll tell me about an identity like within this past semester or last semester, and I'll be like, thank you for sharing with me. I am so, that I'm proud of you for having this understanding of yourself in the 6th grade. That's amazing. And then I have to immediately Google everything they told me because I have no idea what it was. So, I mean, it happens. And I think that is one of the very exciting, for me personally, one of the very exciting things about this community is that as more and more people in the community find words and phrases and understandings of themselves through the English language, it just appears more in our common language. And that is, I think it's thrilling. And I love when kids introduce to me some type of identity or what fits best for them, right? And just knowing that if you're like, you are the first person to tell me this word, I've never heard it before today, even telling them, being like, I love that this identity works for you. Thank you for sharing this with me. And then knowing that you're like, okay, I've learned something else, right? So finding those ways is great. Rosie, do you have any advice on how to convey to students why sharing pronouns is important, especially in underserved communities and communities of color? The last cohort of kids I taught were formerly incarcerated high school students in Queens. Oh, sure. And often conversations around gender identity and even sharing pronouns was quite difficult. Yeah, so, what I like to say there is, of course, modeling with yourself to start, and knowing that and incorporating it into any sort of intro conversation. What I usually say for this moment is that if it can be difficult, finding a way to privately ask can help. And has helped people that I know of in the past. Teachers have told me that has helped them in the past, for students that might need that. When I go into classrooms, I tell them that the pronoun that someone uses is they use this because that is what helps them, and they want to make sure that when you are talking about them, you are respecting them and you are recognizing who they are and who they want you to recognize. we'll get a question about like, why are pronouns important? And I might cheekily start with, well, because I don't want to use the noun the whole time. Like I want to talk quicker, so I'm going to use the pronoun, right? And going in that it's part of language, and knowing that this person using the correct pronoun is going to respect them, and in the end, it's a matter of respect. That's typically where it can end up with in the classroom, especially with students that have come up to me and they'll say, I don't really support the LGBTQ community. And I'll say, I do not need your support. Thank you so much for telling me, and thank you for feeling like you can open up and share that with me. But what I can ask from you is your respect, and the least you can do is respect your peers.
That makes a lot of sense to me, like having the basis of respect and like this, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, especially because like like a lot of communities, it's all about respect, right? And it's all about
Mm-hmm.
like that is the moral code often of the community. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome. Yeah, and I know our work with PFLAG, we're in all 5 boroughs with this work, and I am sure that a lot of you, if you work as teaching artists, find yourself in different parts of the city all the time. And so the student communities you work with are going to be very different. I'll work one day with kids who half of them are they, she, or he, they, and it is a very different world than another community of kids where all of them are coming from very specific cultures or immigrants, where it is what they've grown up with is they're like, this is not who I am, this is not what I was taught. And knowing that, at the very least, I can ask for your respect, because you don't even know, maybe even in the community you're from, there will be queer people, and they deserve the respect as well. So cool. What other questions do we have? This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you. Oh yeah. Yes, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, you don't have to understand it or like it to respect it. Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a kid once who I bring this up. I taught an after school class, and he had a different gender identity every week. Oh, yes, Alex, please.
I was just like, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to talk because I'm a staff member. I don't want to abuse my power. But
Oh, ask, please.
this is kind of an odd circumstance, but I've had it happen to me multiple times. For lack of of a better expression, have you ever had to deal with a student like reverse coming out to you? Because more than once I've had, a student come out to me, once as trans, another time as bisexual, like share that with me, and then months later in the school year say, oh, I actually identify as straight again, or like, actually, no, like I identify as cis again. And I have kind of tried to handle it the same way, but then I've also just had my like natural wonderings and questions of like, is this because a parent said something or a friend said something? Like, how do I make sure that they know that I'm cool either way, but also, I don't, I mean, yeah, it's just sort of an odd situation that I feel like we don't talk about a lot, but also kids are young and they explore and maybe they land somewhere else, and I've just never known quite how to deal with it.
Absolutely. Especially if a kid, I mean, you're going to school, that's where you're going to try on all these identities before you feel safe to try them on at home. So there could absolutely be a situation like that. I think what you're saying is great, especially with a great response to that. If a kid kind of reverse comes out for any part of the spectrum with identity, you can say, are you okay? You don't want to, do you want to tell me more about why you came to this or what you're thinking? Because maybe they're just saying, I thought about it, it just wasn't really my thing. Or maybe it could be something deeper. If they don't feel necessarily sharing this with you, you could always recommend, you do want to talk to the guidance counselor about it, finding if there is someone else at the school that they would like to share this with. And then lastly, just saying, regardless of how you feel about yourself, thank you for sharing. I'm always here for you. I will always accept you, regardless of your identity. So if you in 2 months decide that what you were thinking about before works for you again, that's great too. Just keeping that affirmation up is always going to be your best bet for sure.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, love this. This is an excellent point to make in regards to finding that respectability with community agreements. What does respect look like? What does kindness look like? How does supportiveness feel when we receive it? How do we show it? That opens an opportunity to talk about differences and what makes us unique, and how we, as multi-age and everything else in community, hold that in safe enough for nowness. Cool. I love that. One thing that helps with respect too is, like, I always like to use the community agreements. What is shared here stays here, and what is learned here leaves here. That is just something that it's catchy, but I feel like it helps with understanding respect. Alex, just to kind of actually what I was starting to say, the anecdote I was bringing up is a little similar to what you were saying. I had a kid who I was teaching after school class multiple days a week, and he had I use he him just because this was the one he used the most, but he had a new gender identity with every week, I felt. And maybe that came with a new name, maybe it came with a new set of pronouns, but it was truly him trying on something new every single time. And it's just not where my brain was for me personally, right? And it was not it didn't click for me, obviously, in the way that it clicked for him. And so by the end of not by the end, but a little into our working together, we worked together for 2 years and hung out together. And I remember Mondays after school, when he would come in, and it would be like a weekend, how was your weekend catch up conversation. I would include in that conversation, how are you feeling about gender this week? Like, what's your gender look like this week? What are you thinking? And again, it was a little bit of an outside of the box ask from me, because that's not where my brain would go in conversation with people. But it led him to talk a mile a minute, and he'd be like, oh, I'm thinking about this and this, and I'm gonna try this and whatever. Or maybe he was like, same as last week, so finding ways to open up that conversation can really, really help for kids as well. I know, right, though, Rosie, it makes me so happy that a lot of kids have the freedom now to be able to explore, think about their identity at a much younger age. It is really heartening. It is so heartening to see, so refreshing, and kind of pushes me to continue this work and to continue the want for allyship. And I hope it does for you all as well. I know we have a few minutes left. Would love to answer any other last minute burning questions. I'm going to put my email in the chat if anyone wants to shoot me an email with any further questions, or would love to know more about our programming. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to, oh, that is an excellent, I did not bring that up with the support groups. Thank you. Our support groups are free and all over Zoom. So you do not need to be in New York in person. The only support group that is in person, we have a trans empowerment circle. So all of our support groups are very ally focused, right? Where allies come in for peer-to-peer support. Our trans empowerment circle is for trans adults. So this is for trans adults to meet and be in community. That meets once a month. That is our only in-person meetup right now. All of our other support meetings are on Zoom, so you do not need to be in New York City to attend. So thank you for bringing that up, Nina. Thank you. I'm prepping a collaborative PD on how to support co-TA with disabilities. I'm telling you to translate. Yeah. Actually, if anyone is interested, we are developing some resources for working with D75, District 75, and students with disabilities who are LGBTQ+, and finding ways to still be an ally specifically for kids with disabilities. That is something that is in the works at PFLAG. Oh my gosh, well then email me if that is your wheelhouse. Shannon, I hope I'm saying your name right. I apologize if I did not. But yes, that is exactly what we're trying to work on some more. So yeah, always love to connect on that as well. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Amazing. We're with the right group of people. Rhymes with Shannon. Oh, fabulous. Great.
Great. We
Cool.
have about 4 minutes left. If anyone has that burning question, I refer you back to our community agreements. You can ask any question. This is a space for any and all of them. So if you're hesitant, we've still got a
Even
minute
if you
if you want to throw it out there.
even if you're like, I don't know how to ask this question, this is what's on my mind, please bring it in. I'm happy to help.
All right. Sounds like we might not have a question. If you do and you're typing it in the chat, keep typing. While you're doing that, I'm just going to start wrapping us up. So first, Philip, thank you so much for kicking this series off so beautifully. It's been super informative and really great to be in conversation. So thank you so much for this facilitation. Everyone who joined, thank you all for being here. Our next session in this series is scheduled for Monday, March 10th at the same time, 4 to 5:30 p.m. I put the link in the chat in case you only registered for this session and you want to re-register, you can do so at the link in the chat. And we will be joined by folks from GenderWise for that session. Rachel is here.
Yeah.
So we're really, really looking forward to that. We hope you can join us there. And I also want to uplift next week at the roundtable on February 26th. That is Wednesday, 1 week from today. The roundtable is hosting its 2025 It Starts with the Arts campaign launch and our advocacy symposium. It is a free event in person in the our symposium will be at Mark Bohr's dance group. The launch will be right outside of that for the first hour, sort of a rally launch type thing. So we really hope you can join us for that as well. The first 50 folks who join us will get one of these very fancy It Starts with the Arts beanies. So come for the beanie, stay for the advocacy and community building and fun. The link to register for that and learn more about that event is in the chat as well. We would love to have you there. And also, just if you haven't already taken a look, Face to Face 2025 is coming up in April. So I put the link to the website for Face to Face as well in the chat. We're really, really looking forward to the conference, and registration is open. If you have questions about any of those things, please feel free to reach out to the roundtable. And I really hope that today was helpful for you and that you'll join us for part 2 of this series as we move forward. So thank you, Philip, so much. Thank you all for being here. Rachel,
Thank you
we're
so
excited
much.
for next week, or not next week, next session. And everyone, have a lovely day.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you for the
Thanks
conversation.
all.
Thank you so much.